Welcome back to the Daily Dialogue. This is going to be a new format that we're trying on the DailyFlip podcast. It's a little bit shorter term, kind of closer to the Twitter tirades, but we're going to talk about one specific piece of media just like we would tackle it in the normal podcast. Today, the one we're going to be talking about, and yes, I am walking outdoors, so sorry if there's extra noise that filters through. I'm going to try to get rid of it in post. The piece of content we're going to be talking about is a daily episode. It's a podcast that the New York Times puts out, available pretty much anywhere on Spotify. And they're talking about our initiatives to engineer the climate. And there's one in particular that they're actually talking about, which is the dispersing of particles into the atmosphere, into clouds, in order to brighten them, to reflect more sun away from the Earth. So if you look up at your sky, you see your normal white clouds. They are full of particles of water, and those water particles, they reflect some of the sunlight back out of the Earth's atmosphere. The idea here is to affect the makeup of these clouds, make them a little bit brighter, make them so that they could be a little bit denser, not so dense that they're actually absorbing more light, because we know that water can also be a great absorber of different aspects of the light that comes into our atmosphere, because we know a lot of it's dispersed in the oceans, but make them just a little bit brighter so they actually reflect more back out. And the scientists who are doing this, they are people who are passionate about the climate crisis that is coming our way. At least that's how the author of the report puts it. And the question that always arises with these sort of things, and this is a little bit different than Bill Gates saying that, hey, I want to try to put chemicals in the atmosphere. And yes, I'm fully aware that it's not straightforward as just go spray chemicals in the atmosphere. It's obviously much more tuned than that approach that is kind of talked about in a, I don't want to say propagandistic, but in a fear-mongering kind of way. Oh, Bill Gates, he's out there trying to put chemicals in the atmosphere. It's a lot more complicated than that, but these sorts of efforts, they always feel as though it's a little bit of our arrogance coming to the table and saying, hey, okay, there's an issue that we caused, and you know what? We're going to try to fix it, and we can have the ultimate solution. We can not just accidentally, not just by happenstance of what we're doing, but we can purposefully go and alter the makeup of our environment, of our world. We can engineer, we can play God. And this always very deeply concerns me, because let's be clear, what these scientists are doing is they're really just trying to put more really battered salt chemicals sea salt chemicals into the air. This is a completely natural process. And what I mean by that is they're not using random chemicals that could have completely crazy, unforeseen effects. They're doing something with natural processes, natural things that we can at least calculate some of the effects. Now, the actual brightening of the clouds, the refracting of more light back out, or even just the increasing the volume and brightness of the clouds themselves, maybe that will have unintended consequences. They bring that up within the podcast, and they talk about that, and they say there are fears from lots of different people who are in the environmental movement about this sort of thing happening. But at the end of the day, it's become so dire that we need to address this. And a lot of terrible things, a lot of things that will end up are born out of the desire to fix things, the desire to do something better, to alter our situation in a way that will end better for everybody. And also out of the need, the panic, the fear, the situation is so dire that we need to address it now. We need to address it as immediately as possible. We have to do drastic things. We have to innovate this, innovate that. And let's be clear, the author of the article that goes through this initially, and then the podcasters who are talking about it when they're having their dialogue, that's one of the authors, and then the host herself, they admit that, yes, this is one of the concerns, that some people are pushing back. And then the author of the original article, the original piece, goes on to say, But I don't think people truly understand how dire the climate crisis is. There's this idea that we're fixing it, we're addressing it, but no, we're not on the right path. And while I don't disagree, he's in the literature, he is with the people, he's reporting on it all the time, he may have a better understanding of how much we are falling or falling short of hitting our goal of doing X, Y, Z. Maybe we're only doing X and Y and Z are not getting done to the satisfaction of the environmentalists, of him or other people within the movement. Sure. But I would also posit maybe he's a little bit too in the movement. Maybe when you surround yourself, when you're in these continuous bubbles, and I'm not saying it's a bad bubble, I'm just saying it's a natural bubble. If he's only reporting on environmental stuff, he's going to only see the environmental red flags. He's not maybe going to see the outside perspectives. He's not going to actually take on a opposite position, because everybody he's reporting on within this field sees climate change as an existential threat. They're always looking for the negatives. Maybe he has covered some people that are looking for the positives, and let's be clear, they're probably very limited. But my point is, he's in this bubble, and everybody who's in the environmental movement who does have this same mentality, and this is a disaster. This is going to be the end of humankind. There is no way to innovate out of it. Then at the end of the day, they're going to be very, very willing to do almost anything. Now, let's be clear. I'm all for human innovation, and I'm all for different approaches to addressing our effect on the climate. But when we do these sorts of things, when we do these large-scale things where we're not just trying to innovate a way to reduce fossil fuels, innovate a new type of technology, fuel, innovating better ways to mitigate simply the effects, rather we're actually trying to mitigate the causes altogether. And what I mean by that is not the fossil fuels that we're burning, but rather the causes within our environment. So instead of addressing the thing that we are saying is starting the whole process, fossil fuels, and burning it and trying to find new ways to get around using those, or the back end effects of those. So once the cycle is almost complete, the fossil fuels are burned, the emissions are in the atmosphere, we need to deal with the side effects and we need to innovate for those. We're actually trying to innovate here in the middle and kind of cut that chain off. And in order to do that, we have to go to the middle of the process. The beginning of the process starts here on the ground. It starts with us burning things and setting it up. The end process is how it affects us on the ground. But now we're going to that middle and we're trying to engineer the sky and therefore the climate around us. And that feels very, very arrogant. The author even mentions that this is no longer accidental climate change. This is intentional climate change. And I think that it leads to the question of, okay, you start with a particular premise. You say that at the very beginning, we want to reach X. And then, oh, okay, we're not going to do anything too crazy. We're not going to throw chemicals into the sky. Right now, we believe that it can just be done with salt particles in order to brighten the clouds. And we get a little bit along the path. We're like, oh, some of these things actually work. Okay. But then it falls at a critical point. And then the slip is, okay, well, hey, we know some of these things are feasible. Maybe we can do it with a certain chemical that's not necessarily healthy, not naturally found, that we kind of make ourselves. And you can see how this process de-escalates from there, because we are getting closer. And even though we're trying to do it in a natural, healthy way, and we've tested up to a certain point, in order to reach that end goal, because we know the beginning's at least feasible, we start doing things that are not natural, less healthy, quote unquote, or at least things that are produced, manufactured, which is the exact problem from the very beginning that we've done, which is producing and manufacturing chemicals that aren't going to naturally get into the stratosphere, at least not at the levels they are, and then purposely putting them there. And I feel as though that's very arrogant. And also, the author does bring up the moral hazard aspect, which is, are people really going to try to change their habits? Are we really going to try to innovate on the front end of that process, like I was talking about earlier, with the fuels, with our practices that send those different emissions into the atmosphere, if at the end of the day they believe that, oh, well, we're coming up with solutions where we are putting bad things up in the air, but we're also putting good things up in the air, so it's actually counteracting. It's a good question. I don't think it's the only question, and I think when they frame it as one of the main ones, they forget to ask the question of, are we letting our arrogance be the downfall of us? Are we pretending we know too much? Are we implying that we can directly play with God's tools and expect to get the same results? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Tell me what you think. It's a daily dialogue, so if you got opinions, this forum is a little bit shorter, so maybe people stuck around a little bit longer. We'll see. Throw them down in the comment section. I'd love to hear what everybody has to say. Thank you for joining me for this daily dialogue. If you want to check out the other podcasts, this one will be coming out on Wednesday. There's one that came out on Monday, one coming out on Friday. And check out the Twitter tirade over at the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip. With all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.